The UES Prometheus was the ugliest ship in the human fleet. That was not an opinion. It was a fact, and everyone agreed on it, including the people who flew her. She was 800 meters long, built in 2301, and had been patched so many times her hull looked like a quilt stitched together by someone who hated quilts and had also been blindfolded. Her left engine housing was 3 shades darker than the rest of her body because it had been replaced after the Battle of Kepler Station. Her forward gun array sat 3 degrees off-center, a permanent tilt, like a man who had taken one too many hits to the left side of his face and never fully straightened out again. That had been Davin Iv's gift. The designation plates bolted to her bow had been welded on, stripped off, welded on again, and stripped off again so many times that the hull around them was dimpled and puckered like scar tissue over an old wound. She was a joke. The kind of joke that got told at fleet academies during lectures about decommissioning schedules. The kind of joke that younger officers made quietly among themselves when the Prometheus limped into dry dock for another repair cycle. She had been scheduled for decommissioning 4 separate times in the last 20 years. Each time the paperwork had gotten filed, the new assignment orders had gone out, and then something had happened, a border skirmish, a supply shortage, a budget freeze, and the Prometheus had not been scrapped. She had gone back out instead. Some ships had luck. The Prometheus had something stranger than luck. She had persistence, the dumb, grinding kind that did not know how to stop. Captain Yara Cole stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and looked at the Cavith fleet on her tactical display. There were 41 of them. 41 ships, each one shaped like a crescent blade, each one burning cold blue from their drive cores, each one roughly twice the length of the Prometheus. They hung in the dark of the Aryan corridor like a sentence that had already decided its own ending. Beautiful ships. The kind of ships that made the Prometheus look like a boot someone had found in a gutter. Yara had a cup of coffee in her hand. Real coffee, not the synthesized kind that tasted like hot brown disappointment. She had 12 bags of the real stuff left, packed into her personal locker, rationed out across the 12 days of travel to get here. She had been making them last. She took a sip. It was too hot. She drank it anyway. "They know we're here," said Lieutenant Darrow Osai, her tactical officer. He was 26 years old and had transferred to the Prometheus 8 months ago from the UES Valiant, which was a newer ship and a better posting by every measurable standard. Nobody had ever figured out why he had asked for the transfer. He had never explained it and nobody had pushed him on it, because on the Prometheus, you did not ask people why they were there. You just accepted that they were. "They knew we were here before we arrived," Yara said. "Their flagship is adjusting its position." "I see it." The Cavith flagship was called the Dominion's Word. It was 1,600 meters long. It had weapon systems that could crack open a moon along its fault lines and watch it split apart like an egg. It carried a crew of 4,000 and was commanded by a being named Threshamak, who had personally overseen the end of 3 spacefaring species that had declined the Dominion's offer of integration. Not conquered, not occupied, ended. The records of those species still existed in Cavith archives, filed under a category that translated roughly as resolved matters. 3 species. Gone. Yara took another sip of coffee. The Cavith ultimatum had arrived 16 days ago. It had not been phrased like a threat. It had been phrased like a favor, which was somehow worse. The Dominion was extending to humanity the great honor of integration. All humanity needed to do was surrender administrative authority over 12 of its 40 colony worlds, dismantle its military fleet down to a small peacekeeping force, and accept Cavith governance over its outer territories. In exchange, humanity would receive protection, access to Cavith trade networks, and the privilege of existing under the same banner as 600 other species. 600 species, all of them integrated, all of them no longer quite themselves. The Human Council had met for 3 days. They had argued. They had modeled outcomes on every variable they could quantify. They had run projections on the cost of resistance versus the cost of surrender, and the projections had not been kind to resistance. Then they had voted. The vote was not close. Yara had received her orders 6 hours after the vote closed. She was to take the Prometheus to the Aryan corridor and deliver humanity's response to the Dominion's offer. Her orders did not need to specify what that response was. The Council had not sent her out here with a white flag. She looked at the 41 Crescent ships, burning cold blue in her display. Then she looked at her own. The Prometheus had 14 functional weapons systems out of an original 18. Her shields ran at 83% of rated capacity, because 3 of her emitter nodes had burned out at Callaway's Drift, and the replacement parts had been aboard a supply ship that had never arrived. Her reactor was sound. Myra Solis had made certain of that, the way a mother makes certain her child has eaten before anyone else at the table. But her secondary power conduits ran hot and needed to be manually vented every 90 minutes or they would trip the circuit breakers on decks 7 through 9. Her crew numbered 340, down from a full complement of 420. The Prometheus was not a ship that drew volunteers. 340 people. Against 41 ships. Yara drained her coffee to the last swallow. "Open a channel," she said. The response came 11 seconds later. Kavath communication technology was faster than human tech. Most Kavath technology was faster, denser, more efficient. They had been traveling between stars for 600 years before humanity had figured out how to leave its own solar system. They had a head start of 6 centuries, and they wore it the way old money wears its age, not loudly, just permanently present in every room. The face that appeared on Yara's screen was not Threshamek. It was Veth-Sa, the Dominion's lead translator. The Kavath resembled a praying mantis that had studied human body language carefully and applied about 70% of the lessons. 4 arms, 2 of which did most of the talking in their gesture language. A head too wide for a human face, eyes spaced far apart and flat as coins. Robes the color of dried blood, perfectly composed. "Captain," Veth-Sa said, in English so clean it had no accent at all, "we expected more ships." "We brought what we needed," Yara said. Veth-Sa's upper arms moved in a small, precise gesture. The translation chip behind Yara's left ear rendered it as amusement. "One ship, and this ship," the arms moved again. "Our records show the Prometheus has been in active service for 86 years. She has been heavily damaged on 6 occasions, destroyed twice." "Heavily damaged," Yara said, "not destroyed." "The distinction seems thin from where I stand." Veth-Sa tilted their head at an angle that conveyed, according to the chip, something between curiosity and patience for the slow. "We had hoped humanity would send an official representative, someone authorized to sign the integration accord." "I'm authorized," Yara said, "and I have an answer." Veth-Sa waited. Yara set her empty coffee cup down on the console beside her. She looked directly at the camera. She did not blink. "No," she said. Veth-Sa's arms moved. The chip said, "Pity." The channel closed. Yara turned to face her bridge. It was quiet. The Prometheus was always quieter than the newer ships. Bigger cores made bigger sounds, and the newer vessels hummed with a high, clean pitch that filled their corridors. The Prometheus had her own sound, deeper, older, the low, steady breathing of a ship that had been running long enough to develop something like a rhythm, like a heart that had learned to be economical. She looked at her crew. Darrow at tactical, hands flat on his console, completely still. Chief Engineer Myra Solis at her back corner station, already 3 screens deep into power distribution models, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in the same braid she had worn every day for 4 years without variation. Helm Officer Park Jun-seo at the navigation display, jaw set, eyes forward. Communications Officer Aisha Brandt with her headset half off one ear, monitoring Kavath chatter in real time. 340 people, most of them below decks right now, doing the 10,000 small things that kept a ship like this alive, keeping the conduits from tripping, keeping the targeting buffers calibrated, keeping the hull patches sealed against the cold outside. They had all known what today was. None of them had filed for transfer. None of them had gone to medical with a convenient illness. They had checked their stations, done their jobs, and gotten on the ship that nobody wanted to be on, heading toward the odds that nobody wanted to face. Yara had thought about that for most of the 12 days it had taken to get here. She did not know what to do with it, what to call it, where to put it. She only knew it sat in her chest like ballast and kept her level. She faced the display. "Battle stations," she said. The Prometheus answered. Lights shifted to red. Bulkhead doors sealed along every corridor. Weapons systems charged in sequence, the healthy ones fast, the older ones taking their extra half-second. The capacitors on the forward array needed an additional cycle to reach full charge, 4 seconds longer than a modern ship. Nobody said anything about it. "Their fleet is repositioning," Darrow said, his voice even. "Envelopment geometry. They want us bracketed before they fire." "I know. Approximately 3 minutes to optimal firing position." "I know." Yara studied the tactical display. The 41 Crescent ships were spreading across the dark like a slow hand opening to close around something small. The Prometheus sat at the center of what was becoming a cage. She had spent 11 of the 12 travel days building a plan. She had taken it to Myra first, who had changed it. She had taken the changed version to Darrow, who had changed it further. She had taken the twice-changed version to Park, to Aisha, to the 14 department heads in turn, and each of them had found something to modify, something to sharpen, some edge to refine, until the plan barely resembled what she had started with. It was less her plan than the ship's plan at this point. A plan built from 340 minds, working on the same problem from different angles. It was not elegant. It had no clean lines. It was a plan built from constraint and necessity, and the particular creative desperation of people who had been told the odds and had decided the odds could go to hell. "Myra," Yara said. "Ready?" Myra did not look up from her screens. She had not slept in 3 days, and her eyes had the specific flatness of a person running entirely on competence and caffeine. "Park." "Ready, Captain." "Darrow." "Ready." Yara pressed her arm against the worn-through patch of duct tape on her armrest. It was warm from her own body heat. Outside the viewports, the stars were absolutely still. They did not care. They would be there after this, one way or another, burning the same as always. "The Caveth think this ends fast," Yara said. "Let's make them wrong about that." The Prometheus moved. She was slow compared to the Crescent ships. That was simply, factually true, and there was no point pretending otherwise. But slow was not the same as predictable, and Park Junseo had been flying this ship for 6 years. He knew her the way you know a language you grew up speaking, not as a set of rules but as instinct, as reflex, as something that lived in the hands before it reached the brain. He pushed her into a hard lateral burn, not retreating toward the jump point and not charging the formation center. He took her sideways, at a diagonal angle that the Caveth geometry had not fully weighted, because it was not the rational move. The rational moves were retreat or charge. This was neither. The Prometheus slid sideways through the dark like a bar fight, spilling in an unexpected direction. The first Caveth volley came in exactly where Yara had calculated it would, based on the arc of their formation spread. It caught the Prometheus across the rear port quarter, and her shields absorbed it with the sound, felt more than heard, of a deep bell struck once through the hull. 83%. Down to 71. The ship shuddered. On a lower deck, someone dropped something metal. It rang against the floor, one clean note, and was gone. "Shields holding," Darrow said. "Return fire, Delta and Epsilon full spread." The Prometheus fired. Her guns were old. Her targeting software was 3 version cycles behind standard, because the current update crashed in deep space cold, and Myra had eventually told Fleet Command to keep their update. And Fleet Command had sent back a formal reprimand, and the old software had stayed because it worked. It worked because Myra knew every quirk of it and had manually recalibrated the targeting buffers twice a year for 4 years running. The spread hit Cavith ship Delta across its forward crescent. Delta's shields held. Of course they held. Cavith's shields were very good. But Cavith's shields were engineered to absorb energy in predictable geometric vectors, and the Prometheus's guns fired in slightly wrong directions because of the 3-degree offset on the forward array, and some of the shots arrived from angles that Delta's emitter geometry had not been built to handle at full efficiency. Delta's port bow shield flickered. Just once, less than a second. "Noted," Darrow said quietly. He was already recording it. The second Cavith volley came and Park rolled the Prometheus through a full 360-degree rotation. Not the optimal maneuver by any conventional measure, but the fastest way to bring her ventral shields to bear. And the ventral shields were still at 91% because they had not taken a hit yet. The bridge tilted. Gravity compensators caught most of it. Yara's empty coffee cup slid off the console. It hit the floor. She did not look at it. She was looking at the display, where 41 blue icons moved and adjusted and recalculated, their formation tightening like a fist. They were good. They were very, very good. And they were slightly confused. Not badly, not visibly. But the Prometheus was not following the predicted behavior model, and that small confusion was costing the Cavith commander roughly 2 seconds per decision cycle as he updated his calculations. 2 seconds. Over a long engagement, 2 seconds per cycle was the difference between an equation that closed and one that didn't. Yara's plan was not a plan to win a battle. It was a plan to survive long enough for the battle to become something the Cavith Dominion, in 600 years of expansion, had never encountered before. "Myra," she said. 60%, Myra answered. She knew what was being asked. "Give me 8 more minutes." "You have 6. A pause. "I'll need another coffee." Someone on the bridge laughed. Short. Cut off. The Prometheus took another hit and the lights dipped and came back and she was still moving. In the flagship Dominion's word, Commander Threshamak watched the engagement data and felt the first small cousin of concern settle at the base of his secondary thought cluster. Not worry. He had not felt genuine worry since his campaign against the Dorathi Collective 40 years ago. This was smaller than that. A tightening. A slight wrongness in the data. The human ship was damaged. Its shields were falling. Its weapons were imprecise. By the mathematics of fleet engagement, it should have been debris twice over. It was not debris. It kept moving. It kept doing things that did not fit the model, rolling completely over like a creature shaking water from its coat, firing spreads that were technically inaccurate but finding gaps in his ships, defenses that his own tactical scans hadn't flagged, moving in ways that sacrificed efficiency for unpredictability. Thresh had ended 3 species and won 17 fleet engagements. He had never lost. He watched the Prometheus eat another volley and keep moving. "Increase pressure," he said. "All ships tighten the envelope. I want that hull breached in 4 minutes." His fleet moved. The Prometheus moved. Still moving. Still there, the Cavith fired in waves. That was their standard doctrine. Darrow had spent 3 months studying it from every intercept and stolen data file that human intelligence had managed to collect over the past decade. The Dominion did not believe in single massive strikes. They believed in pressure, in the steady, mathematical accumulation of damage across time, each volley softening a target slightly more than the last, until the defense curve crossed the damage threshold and the fight was simply over. It was elegant. It was efficient. It had worked on every enemy the Cavith had ever fought. The Prometheus had been absorbing that pressure for 11 minutes. She was not elegant about it. Every hit pushed her sideways and Park corrected, and the correction burned fuel and time, and then another hit came in and he corrected again. She was taking damage in a rhythm now, port shields, starboard shields, port again, because the Cavith were methodical and their formation had settled into a rotation that was tightening her options down to a shrinking corridor of space. Her shield percentage was climbing down the numbers like a man, descending a ladder one careful rung at a time. 64%. "They're smart," Darrow said. He did not sound afraid. He sounded like a man reading a weather report about bad weather he had already prepared for. "Tell me something I didn't know," Yara said. "Their second-rank ships are angling to cut off our retreat vector to the jump point." "Good." Darrow turned to look at her. "We don't want the jump point," she said. "We want them focused on the jump point. Keep firing at Delta, same angle as before." "Delta's repaired that shield gap." "I know, fire anyway." Darrow turned back to his console. He fired anyway. The Prometheus's guns spoke in the old language they had always spoken, not the clean, precise voice of newer weapons, but something rougher, more insistent. Delta's shields held, but their emitters shifted slightly to compensate for the angle, the way a fighter shifts his guard toward the hand that keeps hitting him. Which meant their emitters shifted away from something else. "Myra," Yara said. 78%, Myra said. 5 minutes. 4. A sound from the back of the bridge, not quite a word. 4 minutes, Myra. Fine, a pause, fine. 3 decks below the bridge. In the engineering section that occupied the entire mid-spine of the Prometheus, Chief Engineer Myra Solis was doing 3 things at once. She was monitoring the secondary power conduits, which were running at 140% of standard temperature, because she had rerouted power from the ventilation systems on decks 4 through 6, and the extra load was making the conduits sweat. She was directing her team of 14 engineers in real time, each of them at a different critical station, each of them receiving her instructions through their earpieces in the calm, clipped shorthand she had developed over years of working with people in loud, dangerous places. And she was putting the last calibrations on the thing she had spent 4 months building in the back corner of the engineering bay, behind the secondary coolant tanks, in the space that was technically classified as spare parts storage, but had not held spare parts since she had quietly emptied it out. The thing did not have an official name yet. Myra called it the reversal, because that was what it did, and because she was an engineer and engineers named things for their function. It was ugly, the same way the Prometheus was ugly. It was built from components that were not supposed to be combined, using principles that 3 separate physicists at the UES Engineering Corps had told her were theoretically sound but practically impossible, and she had looked at those 3 physicists with the expression she used on conduits that were telling her they couldn't run any hotter and gone ahead anyway. The core idea was simple. The Cavith shield system worked by projecting a coherent energy field around a ship, calibrated to absorb and disperse incoming kinetic and energy-based attacks. It was very good at this. It was so good at it that attacking a Cavith ship with standard human weapons at standard human energy levels was the tactical equivalent of throwing pebbles at a wall of water. The attack just got swallowed. But the shield did not know what it was absorbing. It only knew the vector and the energy level. It dispersed all incoming energy in the same way, regardless of source. Which meant, theoretically, that if you hit a Cavith shield with energy that the shield itself had generated, tuned to exactly the same frequency as the field, the shield would attempt to absorb its own emission. It would try to disperse itself. Theoretically, the 3 physicists had spent 2 weeks explaining to Myra why this was theoretically sound but practically impossible, because you could not capture and re-emit Kavith shield energy without a receiver array tuned to Kavith field frequencies. And you could not tune a receiver array to Kavith field frequencies without a direct scan at close range. And you could not get close range without getting shot, and getting shot would destroy the receiver array. Myra had listened to all of this. Then she had taken the targeting sensors from a decommissioned probe, rebuilt them at 400% sensitivity, mounted them on the exterior of the hull behind the Prometheus's own shield layer, protected, close, pointed outward, and had them recording Kavith field emissions every time a shot came in and hit her ship's shields. Every hit, 11 minutes of hits. She had 4 months of theoretical calibration and 11 minutes of live, real frequency data. The reversal was at 78% ready. She needed 4 more minutes, and she was going to use 3. "Keiko," she said into her earpiece. Her assistant engineer answered instantly, "Ready. Bypass the regulation limiters on conduits 7 through 9. I need that power. That'll run them at 165. They'll trip." "They won't trip," Myra said, "because you're going to be standing right there with your hand on the manual override." A brief silence. "Yes, Chief." The conduits began to run hotter. On the bridge, Yara was keeping the Kavith fleet looking at the wrong thing. It was the oldest trick in any kind of fight. You make someone focus on one hand while the other hand does the work. The difficulty was that the Kavith were not easily fooled. They were experienced. They had fought 100 wars. They had tactical systems that processed 10,000 variables simultaneously and flagged anomalies faster than any human brain could track. But they were also certain. That was the thing about certainty. It was a kind of blindness. The Kavith were certain this fight had one outcome. They were certain the Prometheus was dying, and it was, shields down to 59% now, 2 weapon systems offline from hull damage, 1 crew member in medical, and 2 more with minor injuries from consoles that had blown out under the electromagnetic stress of repeated hits. They were certain that what they were watching was a slow and inevitable process reaching its conclusion. Certain minds stopped looking for surprises. The Prometheus had been engineered accidentally to produce surprises, not because anyone had designed her that way, but because 86 years of getting hit and staying running had filled her with crew after crew of people who had learned to do more with less, and that knowledge had accumulated in the ship's operational culture, the way mineral deposits accumulate in old pipes, layer by layer, invisible until you needed it. "Their flagship is moving up," Darrow said. Yara looked at the display. Threshamak had decided to stop being patient. The Dominion's word was advancing through the formation, coming to the front of the engagement arc. A 1,600-meter ship moving to personally close the distance. "He's done waiting," she said. "Apparently." "Good." Aisha opened a channel to the fleet. She paused. "Our fleet." Aisha Brandt tapped her console. "You're on, Captain." The human fleet was not 41 ships. The human fleet for this engagement was the Prometheus and the Prometheus alone. But the communication array reached beyond this corridor of space, bounced off relay buoys across 8 light minutes, and would carry her voice to the 2 listening posts humanity had positioned at the edges of this sector. The people at those listening posts could not help her. They were there to hear what happened, to carry the record back. "This is Captain Yara Cole of the UES Prometheus," she said. "We are 11 minutes into engagement with the Kavith Dominion fleet, 41 ships. Their flagship is closing." She kept her voice flat and even. "We're still here." She closed the channel. "Myra," she said. 91%, Myra said. Her voice had a different quality now. Tight. The voice of someone threading a needle in a moving vehicle. 2 minutes. "Their flagship will be in optimal range in 90 seconds, Darrow said. Nobody said anything to that. The Prometheus took another hit. The worst one yet. A direct volley from 3 Kavith ships firing in coordinated sequence. The shots timed to arrive within a half second of each other on the same vector, hammering the same section of shield with almost no interval for recovery. It was a designed collapse technique, and it very nearly worked. Shields down to 47%. A conduit on Deck 7 blew. Not the ones Myra had put on manual override. A different one. A secondary branch line that had been running at elevated load and had finally given out. The lights on the bridge went to emergency red for 3 seconds before the automatic rerouting kicked in and the standard panels came back on. In those 3 seconds, the bridge was very dark and very quiet. Then the lights returned, and everyone was still at their stations. Park had not taken his hands off the helm controls. Darrow had not moved. Aisha was already talking to damage control. The bridge crew of the UES Prometheus sat in the dark for 3 seconds and kept working. Yara looked at them. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would mean more than the fact of them being there. "Their flagship is slowing," Darrow said. "Range 4,000 kilometers. They're going to hit us with the primary battery." The Dominion's word's primary battery could fire a focused beam that had, in previous engagements, cut other ships in half along their spinal axis. Clean, single shot. Threshamak was going to personally finish this. "Myra," Yara said. 98%, a pause that lasted exactly 1 second. "Ready." "Target." "Their flagship," Myra said. "Has to be their flagship. Biggest shield emitter in the formation. Most energy for the reversal to use." Yara looked at the 1,600-meter ship filling the front of her tactical display. The Dominion's word. 4,000 crew. The ship that had ended 3 species. "Park," she said. "Captain, take us directly toward the flagship. Full power." The bridge went very still. "Full power," Park said. Not a question, not a protest, a confirmation. "Full power, head on, don't deviate." Park's hands moved on the controls. The Prometheus stopped her sideways drift and swung her bow directly at the Dominion's word. Her remaining engines fired at maximum. The old ship shuddered along her entire length, a deep, resonant vibration that Yara felt through the armrests of her chair, through the deck plates under her boots, through the walls she could have reached out and touched. The Prometheus had not run at full power in 3 years. She sounded like she was being asked to remember something she had almost forgotten. She remembered. She surged forward. Yara watched the distance counter on her display. 4,000 kilometers. 3,600. 3,200. "He's going to fire," Darrow said. "I know." "Captain." "Myra," Yara said. "On my mark." "Ready." 2,800 kilometers. On the Dominion's word, Threshamak watched the damaged human ship come straight at him at full speed and felt something he had never felt in 600 years of Dominion warfare. He had no word for it, because his species had not needed one in a very long time. It was the feeling of not being certain. "Fire," he said. The primary battery of the Dominion's word fired. "Mark," Yara said. The reversal fired. What happened in the next 4 seconds was something that Kavith physicists would spend years arguing about. The reversal's receiver array had 11 minutes of Kavith shield frequency data. It had been calibrated to those exact frequencies, not a theoretical approximation, but live measurements from the actual ships in this actual formation on this actual day. When it fired, it did not fire a weapon in any traditional sense. It fired a precise echo. A mirror of the Dominion's word's own shield emission, returned at the exact frequency and phase angle to cause maximum constructive interference with the field itself. The primary battery beam left the Dominion's word. The reversal's emission hit the Dominion's word's shield from outside at the same instant. The shield, encountering energy at its own precise frequency, attempted to absorb and disperse it the way it dispersed everything. It began the dispersal cycle, And then the dispersal cycle encountered the dispersal cycle itself, the field trying to consume its own output, and for 0.3 seconds, the Dominion's word had no shields at all. The primary battery beam, which had been fired from behind that shield, traveled through the gap. The Prometheus's own forward hull took the beam hit directly. She was not in pieces. The shot had lost coherence passing through the 0.3-second shield gap, scattering its energy across a wider dispersion cone than intended. It hit the Prometheus like a hammer instead of a blade. The Prometheus rang like a bell. Shields gone 0%. Hull breach on decks 3 and 4, emergency bulkhead sealing. Forward gun array offline. 7 crew members down. The medical report was already hitting Darrow's secondary screen. The Prometheus was floating in space, dark and damaged, at 1,800 kilometers from the largest warship in the Kavith fleet. Vethsa's voice came over the channel unsolicited. "Captain Cole, this is over." Yara looked at her display. She looked at the Dominion's word. She looked at the 0.3-second gap, that the reversal had opened in the most powerful shield in the Kavith fleet. "Myra," she said. "Already recalibrating," Myra said. Her voice was completely, absolutely calm, the calm of a person who had been waiting their whole career for exactly this moment. "I have their frequency. I have all 41 frequencies. I've had them for 11 minutes. Yara let out a breath. "How long to full recharge?" 40 minutes. The Prometheus drifted, dark, apparently dead. The stars were still and the Kavith fleet closed around her, and Threshamak looked at his tactical display and saw a broken ship going nowhere. He saw exactly what he expected to see. He did not see Myra Solis, 3 decks below the dead bridge lights, working in the dark with a headlamp strapped to her forehead, rebuilding a weapon that the universe had never seen before. 40 minutes. The Prometheus drifted and waited. The Kavith fleet held its formation. This was standard Dominion procedure after disabling a hostile vessel. You did not immediately move in. You maintained your position, kept your weapons charged, and gave the enemy crew time to realize their situation. Time worked on a damaged crew the way water worked on stone, not fast, but thoroughly. Threshamak had seen it many times. The longer a crew sat in a broken ship in the dark, the more clearly they understood that the math had decided against them. Then they talked. Then it was done. He had given the order to hold fire. The Prometheus was not going anywhere. Its engines were cold. The thermal signature had dropped to near zero within 90 seconds of the hit, which meant either the reactor was offline or the crew had cut power deliberately to prevent a cascade failure. Either way, the ship was an 800-meter piece of debris in his formation center, and it would stay that way. He was prepared to wait. He was a patient commander. Patience was a tool like any other. The Dorathi Collective had been patient warriors. He had been more patient and they were gone. Patience was a competition he had never lost. Vethsa came to his command deck at the 15-minute mark. "No response to our communications," they reported. "The channel is open, but they are not transmitting." "They are thinking," Thresh said. "Should we send a boarding party to assess damage and—" "No," Thresh did not look away from his tactical display. "We wait. A crew in a dark ship with no shields and hull damage will reach the correct conclusion on their own. We do not need to hurry them." He paused. "And I will not spend lives boarding a ship that is already dead. We wait." Vethsa's arms moved in the gesture that meant Asterisk understood and withdrew. Thresh watched the Prometheus on his display. It sat there, cold and dark, and did nothing. Inside the cold and dark Prometheus, no one was reaching the correct conclusion. The bridge was running on emergency power only. Emergency power was enough for life support, enough for the internal communication system, and enough for Darrow's tactical display, which he was keeping on its dimmest setting to conserve the backup cell. The main lights were off. The ventilation was at minimum, enough to keep the air moving but not enough to prevent it from going slightly stale. The temperature had dropped 4 degrees in 20 minutes. Nobody complained about the temperature. Yara sat in her chair in the near dark and ran numbers. She was running them on paper, an actual paper notebook, a thing she carried because she had learned 15 years ago that there was always a moment in a bad situation when the displays went down, and you needed to think with your hands. The notebook was half filled with the cramped, angular handwriting of someone who had been writing in low gravity for most of their adult life. She was working through the problem of 41 ships. Not the weapon problem. Myra owned that problem, and you did not go into Myra's territory when Myra was working. But the tactical problem. If the reversal worked, when it worked, she corrected herself when it would drop any Kavith shield it was tuned to for approximately 0.3 seconds. That was what they had observed on the flagship. 0.3 seconds. The Prometheus's guns needed 0.4 seconds to fire and cycle after the targeting computer confirmed lock. That was a gap, a small one, small enough to matter. In 0.3 seconds. With her primary weapons array offline and her shields at 0, she could not kill a ship. She could damage one. She could open a hull breach, maybe. She could strip an engine housing, disrupt a weapons system, knock someone's targeting computers into a recalibration cycle. She could hurt them. But hurt and dead were different problems, and 41 ships could absorb being hurt for a very long time before the math changed. She wrote numbers on her paper, she crossed them out, she wrote more. The answer she kept coming back to was not one she liked. It required the Prometheus to move between ships at close range, under fire, with no shields, while Myra triggered the reversal in sequence on multiple targets. It required Park to thread the ship through a formation of 41 vessels at distances that were, technically, unsafe for any ship this size. It required the crew to trust a weapon that had worked exactly once for exactly 0.3 seconds, to work 41 more times long enough for the guns to do something useful. It was a terrible plan. She wrote it in the notebook and looked at it. It was the only plan she had. "Darrow," she said. His voice came out of the dark. "Captain. Their formation, are they tightening around us?" She heard the faint sound of his display keys. "Yes, they've reduced the envelope. Ships are at an average of 2,200 kilometers. The flagship is holding at 1,800. Are they scanning us?" "Continuously, full spectrum. They can see our reactor is cold." "Are they reading the engineering section?" A pause. Thermal signatures in the engineering space are consistent with a crew conducting emergency repairs. Nothing unusual. Yara allowed herself one small, quiet thing that was almost a smile. Myra had told her crew to use portable heat sources, maintenance torches, thermal blankets, the small chemical heat packs from the emergency supplies, positioned carefully around the engineering section to produce exactly the kind of scattered warmth that read on thermal sensors as a repair crew in the dark. Working, struggling, doing what damaged ships did. Nothing to look at there. "Good," Yara said. She went back to her notebook. In the engineering section, Myra was not struggling. She was focused. There was a difference, and it was the difference between a person drowning and a person diving. Both looked similar from the outside if you weren't paying attention. She had the reversal stripped down to its emitter core, running a full diagnostic on the capacitor array. The blast from the Dominion's word had not directly hit engineering. The impact zone was decks 3 and 4, forward of her position. But the shockwave had run through the ship's frame and shaken loose 2 of the coupling connections on the reversal's secondary array. She had found them by touch in the dark, identified the problem, and begun the repair in the same unbroken movement. the way a skilled hand finds the right tool without looking. The primary array was fine, intact. The frequency data was stored and stable. She had 41 target profiles. Every Cavith ship in the formation had been emitting shield energy for 26 minutes, and her sensors had been recording all of it. She had frequency, phase, and amplitude data on every single one of them. What she had built was, she knew, a weapon that should not exist yet. The three physicists who had told her it was practically impossible had been right that it was practically impossible with the technology humanity currently possessed. They had run their models on the assumption that you needed purpose-built Cavith frequency emitters to retransmit the captured energy, hardware that humanity had never made and would have taken years to develop. Myra had not used purpose-built emitters. She had used the Prometheus's own shield emitters, the ones that were now offline because there were no shields left to project. The Prometheus's shield emitters turned around, pointed outward instead of inward, not projecting a human shield field, instead broadcasting a precisely calibrated signal on Cavith frequencies, using the Prometheus's own power plant as the energy source. An old ship with no shields, using the hardware that used to make shields to destroy someone else's. She reattached the second coupling connection and heard it click into place. "Keiko," she said. "Ready," her assistant said from 3 meters away. "Run the secondary diagnostic." Keiko ran it. The numbers came back on Myra's handheld display. 100%. Myra sat back on her heels on the cold deck and looked at what she had built and felt the specific satisfaction of a problem solved. Not pride, exactly, more like the closing of an equation. The feeling of a door fitting perfectly in its frame. 41 targets, she said. Yes. Sequencing them by proximity to the Prometheus, closest ship first. Understood. Tell the captain we're ready. Yara received the message at the 23-minute mark. She had been expecting 35, maybe 40. She had built her plan around 35 minutes. She sat very still for 3 seconds and recalculated. Then she set down her notebook. "All stations," she said into the shipwide comm. "This is the captain." Her voice went everywhere, every deck, every section, the medical bay where 4 crew members were being treated, the hull repair teams that had been working in vacuum suits on the breach sections, the gun crews who had been sitting at their dead weapons in the dark waiting. "You have 2 minutes to reach your stations and be ready. What happens next will happen fast. Do your jobs." She closed the channel. "Park," she said. "Hands on the controls," Park said from the dark beside her. "What I'm about to ask you to do is impossible," she said. "I know. I need you to thread this ship through a Cavith formation at 1,200 kilometers per hour, while Myra drops their shields and our guns fire into the gaps. You will have less than half a second per target. If you miss a line and we hit one of their ships..." "We die," Park said. "Yes. And if I don't miss..." Yara looked at the dark where his face would be. "Then they do," she said. Park's hands tightened on the controls. "I haven't missed a line in 6 years." "I know," Yara said. "That's why you're sitting there." She turned back to her display. The Prometheus was dead center in the Cavith formation, 41 ships around her. The Dominions were 1,800 kilometers ahead, patient, waiting for the conversation that was not coming. "Myra," she said. "Ready." "Darrow." "Weapons ready. Primary array is still offline. 14 secondary systems operational. Targeting buffers calibrated." A pause. "I've been preloading targeting solutions for 23 minutes." Of course he had. "Aisha," she said. "All crew comms open," Aisha said. "I've also got a live feed running to the relay buoys." "Good, I want everyone to hear this." She opened the channel to the relay buoys, to the listening posts 8 light minutes away, to whoever was listening beyond this corridor of dead dark space. This is Captain Yara Cole, UES Prometheus, declaring engagement with Cavith Dominion Forces, Aryan Corridor. Time, 0947 ship time. She paused, just for a moment. We're going to see how many of them we can take with us. She closed the buoy channel and looked at Threshamek's ship. She thought about 3 species who had said no and been filed under asterisk resolved matters. She thought about 340 people sitting in a dark ship waiting for her word. She thought about her coffee cup on the floor somewhere in the dark behind her. Reactor, she said to Myra. Ready. Full power. The Prometheus's reactor came back. Not gradually, not carefully. All at once, full ignition, the way a sleeping heart kicks back to life from a defibrillator. Sudden, violent, enormous. Every light on the ship blazed on simultaneously. Every system came online. The engines fired at maximum from a dead stop, and the ship lurched forward like a dog that had been sitting very still for a very long time and had just been told it could run. She charged directly at the Dominion's word. On the bridge of the Dominion's word, every alarm on every console screamed at once. Threshamek had been in the middle of a conversation with Veth Sa about the timetable for the human crew's surrender. He turned to his tactical station and saw the Prometheus burning toward him at full power from 1,800 kilometers, every system lit, engines at maximum, and a weapons charge building in its secondary array. He stared at it. It was playing dead, his tactical officer said. I see that, Thresh said. The not-certain feeling from earlier came back, larger now, less like the first small cousin of worry and more like worry itself, standing in the room. Evasive, he started. The Prometheus fired. Not at the Dominion's word. At the ship on the Dominion's word's left flank. Cavith Cruiser Designation 7, which was 900 meters long and had been sitting in a comfortable holding position 2,100 kilometers from the Prometheus's previous dead float position. 7 had not been paying close attention to the Prometheus because the Prometheus had been dead and the Prometheus was not their concern. The reversal's signal hit 7's shield emitters at the exact frequency of their own field output. 7's shields dropped. 0.3 seconds. The Prometheus's guns fired in that window. 14 secondary weapon systems, all of them pointed at the same section of 7's unshielded hull, the forward reactor housing, which Darrow had been staring at for 23 minutes and had preloaded a targeting solution for with the precision of a man with nothing else to do. The shots went in. 7's forward reactor housing opened up like a flower. The explosion was not immediate. Cavith reactors had multiple safety systems. But the chain reaction that started in 7's forward housing traveled backward through its power distribution spine over the next 11 seconds, and at the end of those 11 seconds, 7 was not a ship anymore. It was a slow, spreading brightness in the dark. The Prometheus was already moving. Park had taken her sideways through the gap that 7's destruction had opened in the formation, and before Thresh had issued a single coherent order, the Prometheus was inside the Cavith envelope, inside the minimum safe range for most of their formation's weapons, threading between ships at distances that made his tactical computer produce warnings it had never produced before in his career. Warnings that translated roughly as, "This should not be happening." The Prometheus did not care what should and should not be happening. She was moving. Park flew like the ship was an extension of his own nervous system. He did not think in full sentences while he flew. He thought in fractions, angles, distances, the relationships between moving objects in three-dimensional space that he had trained himself to read the way other people read text on a page. A Cavith cruiser at 1,400 kilometers, moving at bearing 220. The gap between it and its nearest neighbor, 900 kilometers wide. Enough. Barely. He took the gap. The Prometheus slid through it, and the 2 Cavith ships adjusted their position to close, which opened a different gap behind and to the right, and he took that 1-2 before the adjustment completed. He was flying 2 moves ahead, reading the formation the way a person reads the next sentence of a paragraph before they have finished the current one. The Cavith were firing. They were firing carefully. They had to be careful. The Prometheus was inside their formation now, and the angles were wrong. Half their ships could not fire at the Prometheus without the shot passing through the space occupied by one of their own vessels. They had to coordinate, pick firing lanes, communicate targeting windows, all of which took time, and time was the one thing that Park was not giving them. The Prometheus took 3 hits in the first 2 minutes of the threading maneuver. No shields, the hits went straight to the hull. Deck 9 lost pressure. Bulkhead sealed. 2 crew members in that section got to the emergency lockers and into suits in 45 seconds, which was faster than the drill standard, and something they had done in the dark from muscle memory alone. A secondary power conduit on Deck 11 did finally trip. 1 bank of secondary weapons went offline. 13 operational now. The Prometheus kept moving. "Target," Darrow said. His voice was completely flat, stripped of everything except information. "Ready," Myra said. They had developed a rhythm in the first 3 minutes. Darrow called the target. Myra cued the specific frequency profile for that ship's shield emitters. She had 41 profiles loaded in sequence, ranked by proximity, updated in real time as the formation moved. She fired the reversal. Window. Darrow fired into the window. Park was already moving toward the next gap before the result registered. They did not wait to confirm kills. There was no time to confirm kills. They fired into every window the reversal opened and kept moving and found out later what it had done. Later was a concept they were operating on faith. "Target 14, Darrow said. "Frequency loaded," Myra said. "Mark." The reversal fired. Cavith Cruiser 14's shields dropped. The Prometheus's guns spoke into the gap. The same forward section of the reactor housing. The vulnerability Darrow had identified on the very first ship. The weakness that appeared in every Cavith vessel of this class, because they had been built from the same design template and had the same structural logic. The same choices about where to put the power distribution spine. The same elegant and uniform engineering that had never needed to account for someone knowing exactly where to look. 14's forward housing buckled. The Prometheus was gone before the light from the explosion reached them. 6, Darrow said. 6 confirmed. 14 is 7, Park said without looking up. Confirmed after we're clear, Darrow said. It's confirmed, Park said. Nobody argued with him. He was the only one looking at the angles. Threshomek was issuing orders and watching them arrive too late. Every instruction he gave was correct. Every tactical adjustment his fleet made was the right adjustment. The problem was that the right adjustment took between 3 and 7 seconds to execute, and the Prometheus was changing its position every 2 to 4 seconds, and this meant that by the time the adjustment was complete, the Prometheus was no longer where the adjustment had been designed to address. He was fighting a ship that was always somewhere else. In 40 years of commanding fleet engagements, he had never encountered this specific problem. He had encountered courage. He had encountered superior numbers and superior technology. He had encountered desperation tactics, suicide charges, unpredictable movements. He had filed all of them under the same category, variance within expected parameters. This was outside expected parameters. The human ship had no shields. It had taken direct hull hits. By his damage assessment, it should have been structurally compromised to the point of sluggish maneuvering, like a bleeding animal that could still move but only slowly. Instead, it was moving faster than it had at the start of the engagement. It was moving like it had stopped carrying the weight of trying to survive and had switched to something else. He watched his tactical display. Ship 7 destroyed. Ship 12, reactor breach, power loss, combat ineffective. Ship 14, the assessment was still running, significant hull damage, weapons offline. Ships 3 and 22. Collision avoidance maneuvers had pulled them out of their formation positions, creating gaps that the Prometheus had already used. They were not dying fast enough to panic him, but they were dying. That had not happened before, not to one of his fleets. "Concentrate fire on," he started. "Commander." His tactical officer's voice had a quality in it that Thresh did not like. Restraint. The restraint of someone delivering news they did not want to deliver. "They are inside minimum safe engagement range for the primary battery. If we fire the primary battery at their current position, the blast cone will extend into Ship 9's engine section. Then move Ship 9. Ship 9 is executing evasive maneuvers to avoid a collision with the Prometheus. Moving it out of the blast cone would put it directly in the Prometheus's projected path." Thresh looked at the display. The Prometheus was exactly where it was most difficult to hit. Not by accident, by design. Someone on that damaged, ancient, ugly ship had looked at a fleet of 41 vessels and had found the one place inside the formation where the size and mutual positioning of the fleet made it hardest for the fleet to bring its full firepower to bear. And they had gone there and were staying there, threading between his ships with the specific and infuriating skill of someone who had memorized the blueprint of a building they intended to burn down from the inside. Thresh felt something that was not patience. "Pull formation," he said. "Expand, give our guns room." "If we expand, there will be gaps." "I know there will be gaps. Pull formation, 70-degree expansion." His fleet began to move. Slowly, fleet maneuvers at scale were not fast, but moving. "Myra," Darrow said. "I see it," Myra said. "They're spreading out." "That works for us or against us?" "Both," she said. "More room to maneuver, but more room for them to fire without hitting each other." She paused. "We need to move faster." "Park," Yara said. "Already adjusting," Park said. The Prometheus pushed harder between the separating ships, chasing the interior of the formation as it expanded, staying inside the zone where the angles were awkward. It was like staying in the eye of a storm that was trying to grow large enough to swallow her. "Target 20, Darrow said. "Ready." "Mark." The reversal, the window, the guns. 20's reactor housing, the same spot, the same result. 8, Darrow said. In the medical bay on Deck 6, Lieutenant Osai's secondary screen was receiving a copy of the tactical data, because Yara had routed it there for the 2 officers being treated for injuries from the earlier hits. The screen was small and propped against a wall of cabinets, and the doctor, a compact woman named Nadia Hess, had to work around it because her patients kept watching it instead of watching her. "Hold still," she told the ensign she was treating for a burn on his forearm. 9, the ensign said. He was watching the counter on the secondary screen. "You'll count everything I'm doing here wrong if you keep looking over there." "They got 9, he said. Nadia glanced at the screen in spite of herself. 9 confirmed destroyed or combat's ineffective. She pressed the dermal patch onto the ensign's arm and said nothing. 32 minutes into the threading maneuver, the Prometheus had a problem. She was running dry. Not fuel, her reactor was handling the load. Not the reversal, Myra had 41 profiles and had used 11 of them. The problem was the hull. She had taken 14 direct hits with no shields in 32 minutes, and the damage was accumulating in the ship's structural frame the way debt accumulates, slowly, then all at once. 3 sections were sealed behind emergency bulkheads. One engine was at 60% output because its fuel feed line had been damaged and was running on a bypass that Myra had rigged 20 minutes ago and was not confident would hold past the hour mark. 2 gun turrets had been physically destroyed, not just taken offline. The housings were gone, the guns inside them open to vacuum. 11 operational weapon systems. Yara looked at the numbers on her display, and did the subtraction. 30 secondary weapon systems at the start. 18 had been working when they entered the corridor. 11 now. How long before they noticed we're slowing down? She asked. 7 minutes, Darrow said, maybe less. The expansion maneuver was working. The Kavith ships had room to fire now, and they were beginning to land more coordinated hits. The threading was getting harder. Park's hands were moving continuously, in small, constant adjustments, the way a rider adjusts to a horse that has started to stumble. Myra, Yara said. I know, Myra said. How far can you push it? A long pause, the kind of pause that meant Myra was looking at something she did not entirely like. The reversal is at 100%, she said. I can push the emitter output to 150 without a burnout risk. If I do that, the window extends from 0.3 seconds to approximately 0.5 seconds. That's enough for the primary array if we get it back online. If, Myra said, the word was doing a lot of weight. How long for the primary array? The targeting computer is intact. The physical array itself, 2 of the 4 gun barrels are structurally intact. The other 2 are gone. A pause. With 2 barrels, we lose about 40% of the salvo volume. But 2 barrels of the primary array put out more energy than all 11 secondary systems combined. Yara ran the math in her head. How long? She said again. Myra said 20 minutes. 20 minutes. At their current rate of hits and damage accumulation, the Prometheus had maybe 15 before the structural integrity dropped below the threshold, where the engine bypass would fail, and they would genuinely stop moving. Can you do it in 12? The pause again. 12 minutes, Myra said, requires me to leave the reversal controls. Keiko can run the reversal. Keiko has been running it for the last 6 minutes, Myra said. I handed off when the rhythm was established. Another pause. I just didn't tell you. Yara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. How long? She said for the 3rd time. 10 minutes if nothing else breaks. Go. Myra went. Those 10 minutes were the worst 10 minutes the Prometheus had ever spent in 86 years of service, and she had spent 11 minutes at Kepler Station with her left engine on fire, and her hull breached on 7 decks with a crew of 60 trying to save 290 passengers from a colony transport that had lost thrust. So that was saying something. Keiko ran the reversal. She ran it well. She had watched Myra operate it for 32 minutes, and she had a mind that retained patterns the way other minds retain faces. Her hands moved on the controls with the concentrated care of someone doing something they had not done before but were very determined to do correctly, like a person parallel parking for the first time on a busy street with a car full of people watching. 12, 13, 15. Target 30 was running. Keiko's 15th confirmed hit, the Prometheus's 16th overall, not counting the damage they had inflicted on half a dozen others that were still operational but wounded. The Kavith fleet was down to 25 functional ships. Thresh had stopped trying to coordinate a formal tactical response. He had stopped because the Prometheus was doing something that his tactical doctrine did not have a category for, fighting a retreat that was not a retreat, moving backward through the expanding formation while continuing to hit his ships from inside, like a wasp that had gotten inside a fist and could not be crushed without crushing the fist. He had issued an order that he had never issued in 40 years. General engagement, all ships fire at will. It was not elegant. It was not coordinated. It was the order of a commander who had looked at the elegant and coordinated options and had not found one that worked. 25 ships began firing in every direction that did not contain another Kavith ship. The Prometheus took 5 hits in 90 seconds. A 7th deck section sealed behind a bulkhead. The engine bypass failed for 11 seconds before Myra's automated failsafe caught it, and rerouted through a tertiary path that she had installed specifically for this scenario, and which was, per her own assessment, not rated for the load she was about to put on it. She had put it in anyway. On Deck 4, a structural support spar cracked along its weld joint. The crack was 6 centimeters long. Structural integrity dropped to 71%. The ship groaned, a sound that went through every surface, every wall, every floor plate felt in the feet and hands and chest, the voice of a structure that was still holding but was being asked to account for everything it had ever endured. The Prometheus had endured a great deal. She held. "Primary array online," Myra said from somewhere deep in the ship's bones. "2 barrels, targeting computer is live. Darrow, she's yours." Darrow's hands were already on the controls. "Captain," he said. "Do it," Yara said. The forward gun array, crooked, tilted 3 degrees off-center from an argument with Dava and IV that the ship had won, but not without argument, fired for the first time since the engagement began. At full power, through a 0.5-second window that Keiko opened in Kavith Cruiser 26's shields. 26 did not survive the encounter. 17, Darrow said, and then before the word had fully left his mouth, "Target 27, ready." "Ready," Keiko said. "Mark." The Prometheus did not slow down. The Kavith fleet broke at 23 ships remaining. It was not an order. Threshamak did not issue a retreat command. The fleet broke because the 3 vessels on the outer left flank of the expanding formation made a collective decision, at the same moment, to fire their drives and move toward the nearest jump corridor. And when 3 ships go, other ships look at the thing that caused 3 ships to go, and the calculation changes. The thing that caused 3 ships to go was the Prometheus. She had been in their formation for 51 minutes. She had taken 41 direct hull hits. Her shields had been at 0 since the engagement with the primary battery, which felt like a different era of the fight now, a thing that had happened in a time when the Prometheus was still a damaged, dying ship rather than whatever she had become in the last hour. Decks 3, 4, 7, 9, and 11 were sealed. Her hull integrity was at 66%, which was the number that, on any other ship, would have triggered an automatic system-wide evacuation warning. The Prometheus's evacuation warning system had been offline since Calloway's drift, for reasons that Myra had intended to address before other things had come up. She had 9 operational weapon systems. She had destroyed or mission-killed 18 ships. And she was still inside the formation. When the 3 outer ships broke, Yara saw it immediately on the tactical display. "They're running," Darrow said. "I see it." 23 left, he paused. 17 combat effective, 6 are damaged but mobile. Yara looked at the display for a long moment. 23 ships, 17 that could still fight properly. The Prometheus had 9 guns, a primary array running on 2 barrels, hull integrity that the structural monitoring system had given up trying to assess accurately, and an engine tertiary bypass that was, in Myra's current estimate, about 40 minutes from catastrophic failure. The math had not resolved in humanity's favor, not by any clean accounting. But the math had changed. "Park," she said. "Captain, get us to the edge of their formation. Keep the gaps wide." "Moving." The Prometheus came out of the interior of the Kavith envelope for the first time in 51 minutes, sliding toward the outer formation boundary. As she moved, she left the zone where the Kavith ships had been constrained by their mutual positions, and for a moment she was exposed. No interior cover, no awkward angles to hide behind, the full fleet able to bring weapons to bear. 4 ships fired at her simultaneously. She took the hits. Hull integrity dropped to 59%. The structural crack on Deck 4 extended another 8 centimeters. The tertiary bypass screamed on Myra's monitoring board, and Myra put her hand on the manual, override the same way a parent puts a hand on a child about to fall off a chair, and the bypass held. They're not coordinating anymore, Darrow said. Their command structure is degraded. He was right. Threshamek's general engagement order had broken the formation's coherence, and losing 18 ships in 51 minutes had broken something else, some confidence in the underlying premise of the engagement that had kept the fleet operating as a unified body. Individual captains were making individual decisions now. Some were holding position. Some were angling toward escape vectors. Two were actually moving toward the Prometheus, which was either courageous or had not yet received the information that courageous was not enough in this fight. Target incoming, Darrow said. He meant the two advancing ships. Range 1,800. Myra, Yara said. Ready, Keiko said. Myra was in the hull somewhere doing things with the secondary power grid that she had not explained to anyone, because there was no time to explain. Take the closer one first, Yara said to Darrow. Darrow took the closer one first. The primary array fired through the window. The Cavith cruiser lost its forward half. The second cruiser broke off its approach and moved away at maximum acceleration. 19, Darrow said. Tell them, Yara said to Aisha. Aisha opened the Cavith channel. This is Captain Cole, Yara said. Prometheus, you have 19 destroyed or combat ineffective. She kept her voice at the same flat, even pitch she had used for every transmission today. Not angry, not triumphant, just a person giving a report. You are going to keep losing ships until you leave this corridor. I suggest you do that now. She closed the channel. Threshamek heard the transmission and did not respond. He was standing at his tactical station. He had stood for the last 40 minutes because sitting had started to feel wrong, looking at a display that had gone from 41 blue icons to 19. The 19 that remained were scattered. 2 were in active retreat. 3 were maneuvering to cover gaps the lost ships had left. His fleet no longer looked like a fleet. It looked like what was left of one. He had not issued the retreat order. He was still not going to issue it. Not because he was too proud. He had retreated before, when retreating was the tactically correct decision. But because issuing the retreat now would mean something he had not been willing to face for the last 40 minutes. It would mean he had lost. Not a skirmish, not a setback, an engagement, a full engagement with a single human ship. One ship. A ship that was 86 years old with a crooked gun array, and a crew of 340 people and hull plates that looked like they had been put on by someone who had run out of the right size and had improvised. He looked at the tactical display. Vethsa came to his side. Commander, they said quietly. Their arms did not move. They were too tired to gesture. What, he said. The Prometheus's hull integrity is critically low. Our remaining ships can sustain fire until. She will keep moving, Thresh said. Even at 50% hull integrity she will keep moving. At 30% she will keep moving. He paused. That ship does not stop. Vethsa was quiet. She has not stopped once, he said. I have hit her 41 times. She has not stopped. The channel opened again. Captain Cole's voice. Fleet Commander, I'm not going to keep broadcasting at you, but I want to tell you something before this continues. Thresh did not respond. He listened. You came here because you thought we were weak. You thought one of your ships was worth more than one of ours. You thought 41 of yours was enough to settle it. A pause. We knew you thought that. We planned for you to think that. Everything you've seen from this ship, the damage, the drift, all of it was us using your certainty against you. Another pause. 41 came and 22 are gone. The ones still here can leave. I'm not asking you to surrender and I'm not offering you terms. I'm telling you to look at your display and go home. The channel closed. Thresh looked at his display. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, all ships, withdraw. The Cavith fleet left the Aryan corridor in a formation that was no longer a formation. Ships moved at varying speeds toward varying jump corridors, some of them trailing debris or venting atmosphere, all of them oriented away from the single ship that sat at the center of the space they were vacating. The Prometheus did not pursue them. She did not pursue them because she could not pursue them. At 62% hull integrity, with her engine tertiary bypass 40 minutes from failure, going anywhere at speed would have been a different kind of suicide than the one she had been committing for the last hour. But she also did not pursue them because Yara had not ordered pursuit. She had said go home, she had meant it. The Prometheus sat in the Aryan corridor for 4 minutes as the Cavith ships disappeared into their jump corridors one by one. And then there was nothing on the tactical display, where 41 ships had been except a field of debris. No one on the bridge said anything. The silence lasted for almost a full minute. Then Darrow said quietly, 22. 22, Yara confirmed. More silence. Then Park from the helm, not loudly, just to himself, just for the record. Not bad for an old boat. The repairs took 11 days. Not full repairs. Full repairs would have taken months in a proper dry dock. What the crew of the Prometheus did in 11 days was the specific subset of repairs that needed to happen before the ship could move again without risk of catastrophic structural failure. The minimum work to make a broken thing functional, which was a kind of work the crew of the Prometheus had been doing their entire careers and were very good at. Myra did not sleep for the first 4 days. She slept for 14 hours on the 5th, woke up, ate the largest meal anyone on the ship had ever seen her eat, and went back to work. The structural spar on Deck 4 was the most difficult. The crack had extended to 22 centimeters under the stress of the final engagement, and the section of the spar around it had deformed slightly. It took 3 engineers working in shifts over 36 hours to reinforce it. When it was done, Myra ran a hand along the repair and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, she'll hold. Nobody asked her to be more specific. The 7 crew members who had been injured were all functional by day 6. The burns, the lacerations, the 2 broken bones from the section that had lost pressure, all of it manageable, all of it the kind of hurt that healed. The crew's medical officer had been the most consistently busy person on the ship and had barely noticed the end of the battle, because hurt had kept arriving at her door in an orderly queue and she had dealt with it in the same orderly way. On day 3 of the repairs, Yara received a communication from the Human Council. It was from Council Chair Obi Farrow, a man she had met twice in person and who had always given the impression of someone carrying more weight than was visible. The message was 3 sentences. The Cavith fleet has returned to Dominion space. Preliminary analysis suggests significant political disruption within the Dominion Council. The loss of 22 ships in a single engagement to a single vessel is unprecedented in their recorded history. We would like to speak with you when you are able. Yara read it twice. She sent back, available when Prometheus is mobile, estimate 6 days. She folded her notebook and put it back in her pocket and went to see what Myra needed. On the 9th day, the listening post relay buoys delivered a secondary message. Not from the Council, from the Civilian Communication Network, a general broadcast that had started as a news report and had then become something else, the way things sometimes do when they find the right note. Someone had taken the relay feed from the engagement, the live audio that Aisha had been broadcasting to the buoys throughout, and had published it, all of it. 67 minutes of tactical audio from a bridge in the dark. Captain Cole calling targets. Darrow counting. Park saying nothing at all, just flying. Myra's calm voice from engineering giving updates. The broadcast had been heard by approximately 9 billion people in the 11 days since the engagement ended. In it, if you listened carefully, was a moment that people kept returning to. It was not a famous line. Nobody had written it intending it to be remembered. It was 32 seconds from the middle of the threading maneuver when the Prometheus was taking hits and the lights were cycling, and Darrow said, in the same flat voice he had used for everything else, "Structural integrity at 72%. Hull breach risk in Sector 4. And Yara's voice, noted. That was all, noted. 9 billion people heard asterisk noted and understood something about who they were and what they could endure. On day 11, Darrow knocked on Yara's cabin door. She was at her small desk, working through the formal after-action report, which was the most boring document in the universe and was also required. She told him to come in. He stood in the door. He had a cup of coffee, real coffee from his own supply, she noted. She had not known he kept any. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About why I transferred to this ship." She waited. "I've been trying to find the right way to say it for 8 months. He looked at the coffee cup. "I think what I knew when I was on the Valiant was that the newer ships were very good at doing expected things. The Valiant had better guns and better shields and faster systems and better odds in any scenario the tactical models could build." He paused. "I just kept thinking that the scenarios the models couldn't build were the ones that were going to matter." Yara looked at him. "And the Prometheus seemed like a ship that had been living outside the models for a long time," he said. "And I thought the people who flew her probably knew how." He put the coffee cup on her desk. "That's why I transferred," he said. He left. Yara looked at the coffee. She picked it up. It was the right temperature. Outside the viewport of her small cabin, the Aryan corridor was dark and empty and perfectly still. The debris field from the battle was too scattered to see from here, just the dark, and the stars burning in it the same as always. The Prometheus hummed around her. That deep, old sound. The sound of a ship that had been running so long it had developed something like a heartbeat. Yara drank the coffee. 2 weeks later, the Dominion's word returned to the Aryan corridor. Not with a fleet, not with weapons charged. It came alone, moving slowly, and it broadcast its approach on the open channel 40 minutes before it arrived. Threshamek's voice in Kavith, translated by the chip behind Yara's ear. He was requesting a meeting. Yara looked at the single ship on her tactical display. The flagship that had fired the shot that had nearly cut the Prometheus in half. 1,600 meters of the most advanced military technology in explored space, sitting 60 kilometers away, waiting. She thought about 3 species filed under asterisk resolved matters. She thought about 340 people who had sat in a dark ship and kept working. She opened the channel. "Commander," she said. "Captain Cole." His voice was different from the recording she had heard before the battle. The crisp certainty was gone. What was left was something older, a voice that had been somewhere it had not expected and had not fully come back from it. "I am here in an unofficial capacity. The Dominion Council does not know I have come. I came because I needed to see you." "You're seeing me," Yara said. A pause. "I have fought 34 fleet engagements," he said. "I have fought species that were more advanced than you. I have fought species that had numerical advantage. I have never lost a fleet engagement." Another pause. "I want to understand what you did." Yara thought about how to answer that for a moment. She looked around the bridge. Darrow at his station, Park at the helm, Aisha with her headset on monitoring, the repaired consoles, the patched hull, the duct tape on the armrest, the whole beloved, ugly, battered reality of the place she had commanded for 7 years. "We didn't do anything complicated," she said. "You destroyed 22 of my ships. We took everything you knew about us and used it. You knew we were slow. You knew we were old. You knew our ship was damaged." She paused. "You knew exactly what we were. You just didn't know what we would do with it." Silence on the channel. "I have 600 years of records," Thresh said. "Every species the Dominion has encountered, every engagement, every outcome." A pause that lasted a long time. I do not have a category for the Prometheus. Make one, Yara said. You're going to need it. She closed the channel. She sat in her chair for a moment. The duct tape was warm under her arm. Then she picked up her notebook and opened it to a clean page and went back to the after-action report, which was still the most boring document in the universe. The Prometheus hummed. Still here. Still moving.